Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Bonjour. Salam alaikum. May I kindly ask everyone to move closer to the front. Please, everyone behind, kindly move closer to the front. We are trying to create, a more connected and engaging space. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous invite s'il vous plaît à vous rapprocher des sièges du devant afin qu'on puisse créer un espace beaucoup plus engageant et connecté. Merci, merci. Merci à tous ceux qui sont en train de se déplacer vers devant. Please, everyone, kindly move closer to the front chairs.
Countries, what has happened with agricultural transformation? Have we reached our targets? It's well articulated under the Malabo Declaration. So that will then eventually take us through to a summary that will be presented by Dr. Soto. As we do that, like I indicated, I'm just waiting for Commissioner Sako. She has left her file in the room to come back to us and give us.
Thank you. I'll ask Chris over there to share with us the videos of yesterday, videos and pictures. Right back. Thank you, Your Excellency, for honoring us with your presence. Yesterday, we laid a strong foundation addressing the importance of localization in policy action, the critical role of institutional capacity, and the pressing need for climate resilience in Africa. Today, we will continue to build on those insights with a dynamic program designed to inspire collaboration and innovation. I'll hand over to Mrs. Alago.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, dear delegates, let's allow me to please welcome Commissioner Ambassador Josepha Sako to give us her opening remarks for this session.
Thank you, MC, for giving me the floor. Good morning, every one of you. And so it's also my pleasure to be here and share with you our post-CADEP Malabo agenda for the next 10 years. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of the architect of this really bold and inclusive tool that we have craft. As MC said it rightly, we are going to submit, we are going to the last step of the process. We are going to submit it to our head of state for adoption in January from 9 to 10 in Kampala. So we will come out now with Kampala Declaration. I would have wished to have a Luanda Declaration, but my country was not very to host it because we have had Maputo Declaration, Malabo Declaration, now we have Kampala Declaration. But for me, as a commissioner of the entire continent in this thematic of agriculture, whether it is Kampala, whether it's Ghana, whether it is the same, we want a united Africa. All the countries matter. It's not about Luanda or Morocco or Algeria, wherever. It is about a program for Africa. And this program was really, really very inclusive. We did not leave anyone behind. Most of you that are here participated in the 13 working group. We were able during 1 year to really listen to what do we do after 2 decades of the implementation of our flagship program, the CADEP. So after 20 years, what is remaining for us to remove Africa in the status of food insecurity and malnutrition and poverty as well. So I think that this new framework will allow us to speed up and make sure that all the citizens of Africa has access to the 3 square meal, and they have also access to health and a good livelihood. So that is why I'm really it's my pleasure to carry you along to share what is the process about and what we have been doing all along. Distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to address to you today as we come together to reflect on a critical juncture in Africa's agricultural transformation. The comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program known as CADEP, which has guided our collective effort over the past 2 decades, is nearing its conclusion and is about to expire. This session provides a unique opportunity to assess its impact and chart a path forward for the continent's agriculture and food system post-2025. So I will call this session a creating awareness of this important framework that we are going to submit to our head of state and government. Celebrating CADEP process and challenges. Since its inception, as I say, in 2003, CADEP has been a cornerstone of Africa agriculture policy framework. It sets bold and inspiring goals, halving poverty, ending hunger, and eradicating child malnutrition through inclusive agricultural growth. These objectives emphasize the pivotal role of agriculture as a driver of sustainable development and economic transformation across Africa. No country in Africa can say that we don't depend on agriculture, even not only Africa, globally, because even in the developed country, they still have a Ministry of Agriculture in order to feed their people. So this is very, very pivotal. This department, we are all here gathering and we are all working on the same sector. Over the year, CADEP has catalyzed significant achievement. It has encouraged investment in agriculture, fostered regional collaboration, and enhance policy alignment across member states. Through CADEP, we have witnessed remarkable successes from increase in agricultural productivity to advancements in market access for smallholder farmers. However, challenges remain. Poverty persists in many regions. In many regions, food systems are under strain from climate change and conflict, and agricultural policy are often underfunded. Smallholder farmers who are the backbone of the African agriculture. We know that our model is really small-scale farmers. Whether we have to say that we want the big and big agriculture, big sectors of agriculture, but we know that majority of agricultural producers are really farmers. So we need to concentrate on farmers and empower them. Continue to face a lot of barriers in accessing resources, technology, and markets. These challenges remind us that while progress has been made, much work lies still ahead. If we don't take this issue of small-scale farmers on board, I'm sure we are not going to achieve all the goals we are setting in Agenda 2063 and also our global agenda, the SDG Agenda 2030. The post-25 agriculture agenda, a new horizon. As we approach 2025, we still have only 1 month. There's something, technology. Okay. Thank you. As we approach the 2025, we must ask ourselves, what comes next? How do we build on the foundation laid by CADEP to address emerging challenges and seize new opportunities? The post-2025 agenda must go beyond addressing immediate needs. It must embrace a long-term vision for resilient, inclusive, and sustainable food system capable of feeding a growing population while safeguarding our environment. So we have two challenges. While our population is growing, and we are also the most vulnerable on the impact of the climate change. So those are the two areas where we really have to focus. Make sure that productivity, we have the good productivity to attend the demand of the growing population on the continent, and let us also have resilient program in order to mitigate the impact of climate change. What are the key priorities for this new agenda? This includes ensuring our food system are equipped to withstand the impact of climate change and environmental degradation. Since yesterday, we've been talking about it. We are going next week in Riyadh to address this one. We hope that COP16 will not be like COP29, because it seems as if those COPs are becoming a tourist area where we go and we pay $4,000 a night and we come out with nothing. This is taxpayers. This is really taxpayers. We are in African Union. It is our member states that pay their subscription for us to come with results. But we go there without no result. We are just spending. We spend a lot on transport, on food. So it's becoming, those cities are becoming touristic, climate touristic area instead of addressing the real problem. So we are now going to Riyadh. We think that it will not be the same because we are just going from one COP to another. This year we have 3 COP. We had 3 COPs. We had a COP in Colombia for biodiversity. Now we are going to have in Riyadh COP16 for desertification, and we had this climate change COP, but there is no result. They keep on promising us. We see Paris, this thing. I think we can even turn the page of Paris Agreement because we didn't see anything. So now they are coming to say Baku's declaration or commitment to 2030. We don't know if we'll still be alive or not, our children. But, I think we need to reflect and rethink about this type of conventions that we've been going from one year to another without any result, without any outcome. Is not changing our life. Instead, they're even telling us that we're discovering gas to go energy transition. Why should we go energy transition when we are discovering gas? Who is going to give us, this is our natural resources. Who is going to compensate for us to shift this transition, to shift this transition to another energy? Who is going, because it requires a lot of investment. Who is going to pay for that? So we have to be more bold. We are not fighting anybody. We are not polluters also. We are not fighting anybody, but it is time for us as the think tanks to sit down and say, Africa, let's stop assisting all this COP. Because we are not the emitter by the way anyway. So whether we go, we don't gain anything. So that is why, we have to really start looking at this problem of COPs. We can have COPs. We had our own COP in Nairobi, the Nairobi Declaration. This is where we have all our common position. We had it last year, the Africa Summit, the Climate Summit. I think that platform is very good for us to solve our own problem, to mobilize our own resources with private sector, everybody, than to go and waste the taxpayers' money to go and do tourism. If we want to do tourism, we have a lot of tourism here in Africa. We have Victoria Falls, and we have all this. So I'm talking my mind because I'm going. I hope the next commissioner will follow my dynamics, because enough is enough. Yeah. So the second priority for us is leveraging technology to improve productivity, streamline value chain, and empower farmers with real-time information and tools. It is good that our farmers should have really knowledgeable and actionable tools for them to be able to do, to perform better in agriculture. Yesterday we launched the farmer soil, farmer know your soil. So this is a very important tool. Those type of knowledge we need to really, emphasize it and go with those initiatives, because this is African needs. Strengthening policy and increasing investment to unlock the potential of agriculture as a driver of economic growth. We know that we have this carbon market. Let us also think, how can we sell our ton of carbon, 1 ton of carbon in Africa? They're paying us $5 to $8. But elsewhere, the other regions of globally, they're paying them $35, $50. Why is our ton of carbon so low? Does that mean that our carbon is bad quality? So those are also the reflection that we have to know, because we're just talking about carbon market. Many of our ministers, our principals, they don't even know what is the mechanism, what is this carbon market, how does it happen? So I think this is another area also, during this 10 years action plan, we need to focus. And when we enter in that market, we are really an expert to win, not to lose. And the fourth one is addressing gender disparity and ensuring that small farmers, women and youth are at the center of the agricultural transformation effort. I think our pillar number 4 of the post-Malabo is really very, very, very inclusive, because we said that we should include all these vulnerable people, women and youth, and try to empower them and try to really put them on the table so that we can know what do they need. A call for collective action. Ladies and gentlemen, the future of African food system lies in our collective hands. Government, the private sector, development partners, research institutions, and farmers must come together in a spirit of partnership and innovation. Only through collective collaboration can we address the multifaceted challenges facing our continent and achieve the ambitious goal of the post-2025 agenda. So since the beginning, we say that we cannot do anything we cannot isolate any society or institution. Let us work together and we get a solution, because we need each other, for the progress of our Agenda 2063. Today's section is an important step in this journey. I encourage all of us to engage openly, share insights, and contribute actionable recommendations. Let us ensure that the lesson of CADEP inform a stronger, more inclusive, and more sustainable agricultural framework for Africa. CADEP is the only policy that we have to transform agriculture. There is no other policy, because there is no forum that can bring all the head of state together to endorse. And what we did is to really engage ourselves with our regional economic community, because they have their own constituency on the 5 regions of Africa. We have the ECOWAS, we have SADC, we have ECA, we have IGAD, all of them. They are also part of this CADEP. So when they are working with their own region and their own constituency, they have to look at CADEP as the only one. We should not repeat ourselves. We should not fragment more initiative, because otherwise we are just losing our time. Let us, each one that wants to pick a pillar on the CADEP, let that institution go ahead and work directly with our member states. They should work directly with the member states so that they will implement whatever pillar it is in CADEP, but not repeating to CADEP, because even our partners, they are getting confused. Today we have thousands of food systems. What is food system? When we are talking about the same thing, this is an advice from experience that we should have only one program, because this program will be endorsed by all the head of states and government. All the countries are going to endorse, so we should not repeat. But we have institutions, because African Union is not an implementing agency. African Union is just a policy maker, but we need institutions to come and start to implement it at the national level with the farmers, because we have farmers association. We should leave African Union aside. Let us just come and do the biannual review report and see how we are progressing. This is our role. But the role of implementation, all the African institutions, they are free to go and start working from this milestone program that we are going to present on the 9 and 11. If anybody wants to bring another initiative, it will not work this time. Because even the partners, I was in the G7, they invited me to go and present the CADEP, the post-Malabo, the 2025 post-Malabo CADEP agenda. And I presented it in the agricultural group of the G7. Those are the people that really help us to mobilize, assist us with funding our activities. They have recognized the importance of CADEP. Maybe Malabo, we did not do it right. That's why I commend my brother Bajan that is here. I think we did, together with all the stakeholders here, we did a very, very comprehensive job. And I really want to leave this tool in the right way. I will be where I will be, but I will also support, because this is my profession, this is what I did throughout my life, so I will be supporting, I will be mobilizing funds so that we have advanced, because we are all concerned. This is not a matter of an institution, it's a matter of all the population of Africa to improve their livelihoods. So, in closing, I extend my heartfelt thanks to all the panelists, moderators, and participants for contributing their time and expertise to this important discussion. Together, let us envision and build a future where Africa's agriculture flourishes, our people are nourished, and our continent thrive. I wish you a fruitful deliberation, and I look forward to the insights and the recommendations that will emerge from this session as we navigate the next chapter of CADEP and Africa's agriculture journey. I thank you very much for your kind attention. Merci beaucoup. Shukran. Muito obrigada. Muitas gracias. Asante sana.
Many thanks, Commissioner Joseph Asako. I think you have all heard it. Where we are, Africa's vision is being led by the African Union. Dear delegates, we still have then one presentation before the panelists, and I am sure he'll be able to also give us some highlights as to, with all that is at stake with the countries, where are they falling short, and what does that mean, specifically in terms of the data that we have been collecting over the past 9 years. Because, you know, garbage in, garbage out, we do track the performance of the countries based on a specific data tool. And when data is not reliable, then eventually your performance rating will also not be so good. So please, Dr. Badiane, thank you for having you with us.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Thank you, Ambassador Sako. It's a pleasure to see you again. I want to know how we're going to be dealing with the presentation. Do you have a remote control for me, or is somebody going to use it? Okay, while it's coming, let me just say it's a pleasure for me to be here to recognize and greet Ambassador Sako for her leadership at the African Union Commission, not just during the implementation of Malabo, but working very hard to make sure that she will leave behind one of the strongest, most inclusive CADEP strategies for us. So thank you for that. It's, of course, a pleasure also to be here to join ANAPRI, my friend Anthony and the board members here, I think Richard Makandawire. But the highlight for me is to meet Professor Obare after almost 40 years since college. So it's really a pleasure seeing you here again. So thank you. I'll be talking about CADEP as really a source of institutional innovations for transforming our food systems in Africa, what we've achieved and what are the lessons for the next decade. Okay, so let's first look at what African countries and other countries have struggled with for a long time. Whether it's in Africa or in the North, we are always trying to find the right place where to be as we try to develop economies in the long run. Are we going all the way government-led, or are we also creating space for the private sector? Is it the public sector? Is it markets? We have had that tension since the 60s, and most countries have it. You look at the European Union Common Agricultural Policy, or you look at the US, you have the same tensions here. But also what we have more than the others is, where are we? Are we focusing more on agriculture, more on industry? Is it more the urban sector? Is it more the rural space? Our governments deal with that every day. And that has influenced how we've done policy in the past. And I'm saying this because I want to go where CADEP is right now. You look at the history of African countries. In the 50s and 60s, there's a very heavy understanding in the profession as well as in practice that industry-led growth is going to take us where we want to be. We jumped from there all the way to the 70s, and we're talking about basic needs and rural development, a huge shift. Then it came all the way down in the 90s and 80s, but market-led growth. You remember the structural adjustment, the World Bank and IMF and so on. Then it moved in that same decade towards poverty reduction strategies because we just couldn't see any progress going. Then CADEP came in the early 2000s. What is remarkable about this is not just that Africa could never focus on a continuous agenda. It's been shifting every decade, and within the decades, there are various sub-themes, all developed outside of Africa, brought into Africa, and didn't allow us to have the kind of continuity and the kind of focus that we needed. In the 2000s, with the beginning of CADEP, that's when Africa started for the first time to have a continuous, consistent agenda that is rooted in the realities of the continent and that was driven over these very, very many years. And I think that made a huge difference for the continent, as you will see. If you were to see how China handled this, we don't have enough time to do it. It was a very smooth transition. China never went back, up, down, left, right, and so on and so forth. And that has delayed us for a long time. This green circle is where we are now, agriculture-led, focus on growth and poverty reduction, and we've driven that, actually in a very consistent way. The way the agenda was put together, it has shared principles, ownership and leadership by the African countries, which is very different. Madam Commissioner was talking about the G7 back in 2004-05 in the G8, but certainly from the 2008 summit must have been in L'Aquila, they started talking about country-owned and country-led, which was a huge change in the way African agenda is being led. So one of the biggest innovation is about mutual accountability. Evidence-based, how you drive, you measure, and you track. Again, because we had that luxury to focus, to develop something that is consistent and drive it. We had a very clear strategic direction, and this is all about CAADP, agriculture-led growth, evidence-based policies, and then setting common goals and targets for the entire continent, allow countries and all stakeholders to work toward that. Okay? So you have the Maputo commitments, the Malabo, and hopefully now, soon the Kampala commitments. Another thing that is really good about CAADP, is the fact that it has been a gradual process. In Maputo, it's very simple. 2 goals, 10% growth, 6% growth, 10% agriculture. It expanded in the Malabo, and it's now being refined under Kampala. That is what continuity allows you to do. If you were to jump, like I saw before, 1 decade from one thing, next day to another thing, back and forth, you'll never have this kind of steadiness, this consistency, and this coherence. That's what CAADP allows us to do. The mutual accountability around the biennial review, and I have not talked here about the joint sector reviews as well, which is now being practiced by 24 countries in a very different way. We can comment on that later. But how Africa has innovated to create a platform for tracking, for measuring, and benchmarking has been one of the biggest innovations of the CAADP agenda, which is actually being copied by other countries. I remember Nepal sent a delegation here to Senegal about last year just to look at the joint sector review process here. So you've seen the process in terms of the parameters that are being tracked in excess of 500 to allow us to be aware of what's happening in the different countries. So let me now, this was a very quick overview, but 2 things are salient here. An agenda that is gradual, homegrown, that allows continuity and consistency, and then mutual accountability at the heart of it for measuring and tracking. So what has CAADP achieved for us since then? We are often fixated on the 10% share. But if you look at the absolute value, constant dollar terms, of investment in agriculture, it has gone up tremendously, almost doubling, and this is just stopping in the year 2021. So quite a large share of annual investment in agriculture. The share has not grown much because a lot is being spent on infrastructure, education, and health, but absolute countries have done quite a lot of efforts in raising agricultural expenditure. This graph I really love. I was sitting in a board meeting and a colleague of mine came and then touched me and said, Usman, look at this table. Africa is beating everybody in terms of productivity. We never had anything like that, okay? This graph, the red line is the fastest growing agricultural value added growth rate in the world, faster than any region. People say, well, that's from a very small base. You go 2 decades earlier, that red line was at the bottom from even a very much smaller base. So what's happening is that there's vigor, there is vitality in the African system. Not where we want to be, but I've never had anything like this prior to CAADP, where African agriculture is growing faster than any region in the world. In terms of land productivity, Madam Ambassador referred to that, and in terms of labor productivity, the curves are again up. We didn't have that prior to CADEP. So things have changed in a positive way and in a powerful way, and therefore giving us more courage to continue with the Kampala agenda on these roads. We have a lot to do, but we can get to that. So how do we deepen this agenda? And what should be future core priorities? Here is the new strategy that Madam Commissioner referred to with the 6 different priority areas. I will not be able to go through each and every one of them, but I'll select 2 to talk about them. The first, Area 1 and Area 5. And in Area 5, I will not talk much about climate resilience, but community resilience, which you often forget. We all are fixated on climate resilience, but there's a lot to be done also for community resilience, which is actually the ultimate resilience. Looking at intensifying sustainable food production, agro-industries, and trade, we need to take cognizance of the fact that our food system, agri-food value chains are different today than they have been just 10 years ago. And it is within that reality that we have to root our strategies. I give you an example of the millet value chain in Senegal. Oops, sorry. So what is happening here now? Go back. Okay, so until very recently, we had a very traditional value chain where millet was being produced and processed and consumed very close to the household, right? It was really a very much home-based. Even in the urban centers like Dakar, if you didn't have somebody around who could prepare the millet-based meal, you wouldn't eat millet-based meal. It's very different now. We have this modern value chain with an urban consumer market where you have ready-to-cook and ready-to-eat meals. And this is extremely important because the millet that you produce in the rural areas is not going to be consumed by the consumers unless it goes through this chain now, right? And that has an implication as to how do we design agriculture sector policies and how do we design rural development policies. What you just saw in that graph is reflected here. These are the shares of processed and semi-processed traditional African staples. We're not talking about even your big guys, your cassavas and your local cereals. If you look at the fastest growing bands there are processed intra-African and semi-processed inter-African food. The yellow and the orange are responsible for the biggest share of increase in trade among African countries. And even for external trade, the blue one and the gray one, you add them to that, most African countries are now trading in processed and semi-processed agricultural products. It's because of the emergence of those value chains, right? What does it mean? In the past, when we tried to develop agriculture in the rural areas, we have tried to move productions out of the production areas into the village district, into the rural towns, into secondary towns, and the urban centers. That was the challenge. We're building roads, we're forming farmer cooperatives, we're putting market infrastructure, storage, access to finance, marketing policies, price information, all of that, so that farmers can find a market to get there. That was the problem then, it's still the problem now, but it's not enough to solve the issues. Now in the transforming value chains, the boundaries to market, the distance is no longer physical. You no longer have to get transport to get the things out, but you have to move up a product sophistication stage. You have to go from a raw product to a improved packaging, to processed, to ready to eat, to ready to cook, and so on. That's what the millet had to do. Before, it has to go from the production areas to the urban centers. Today, it has to go up this ladder, in addition to trying to reach the urban center. It's a completely different solution that we need here, and we cannot forget that, and this is going to be very important. It is the processing sector, because of this, that is now the biggest bridge between the farming community and the urban markets. between the smallholder farmers and where the demand is. It's no longer just the road, no longer just the storage, no longer just the transport, no longer just the marketing sector. Here we're talking about how do we get to incremental value addition? How do we create the systems in place for cleaning, for processing, first, second, third stage, for packaging, for branding, for distribution? That is going to be extremely important to move us. So out of that, you have firm-level policy priorities, as well as you have sector-level priorities that have to gain more prominence in what we're trying to do. Our policy is to facilitate enterprise creation, technology acquisition, access to capital, skills development, both technical and managerial, has to be at the core of what we do for our value chain transformations, more so now than in the past. If we get that done right, we'll increase the capabilities for product and process innovations, and the demand constraints will be overcome through increased raw material use because we're much more competitive. And I need to emphasize here that these enterprises that we're talking about here are not your large-scale guys, your Unilevers and others. These are anonymous, unknown, small, tiny 1 to 5 people processing companies across Africa in the meat sector, in the thousands, right? But they need all this support so that they can increase their capacities, compete more, capture a larger share of the rapidly growing demand. We need to allow those small companies to grow and to maturate. And for that, we need to look at things around transport technology, cold chain, and so on, conservation technology to reduce waste and loss, energy supply, digital infrastructure, norms and standards, intellectual property, because in this market, anybody innovates, everybody owns it. So it really creates disincentive to do that, and competition policies as well. If we do that, we will foster competitiveness of the small and emerging processing sectors in the urban markets and capture a growing share of these hundreds of billions of dollars. Just one comment on this here, why it's important. We're often fixated with export to the global market, which is very good because we need that market. But the global markets for Africa is growing in the tens of billions of dollars over decades. The local market, continental region, is growing in the hundreds of billions of dollars over decades. So capturing even a small share of that is extremely important, is more important than capturing a large share of the global market. So that was on the first priority area. The second, I said I'll be talking about more community resilience. It is just not acceptable for us that every shock leads to large-scale suffering and disruption of community livelihoods, in particular to national and community leaders. That should not be acceptable. We can be better prepared. We have to be able to live with shocks and see what to do. And in order to be able to do that, it's part of the resilience agenda, not just the climate one, we have to invest in better understanding the patterns and the nature of vulnerability at the community level. If you don't know it, if you don't understand it, if you don't master it, we cannot conquer it. And we have to do a little bit more there. We have to take deliberate action to target the drivers of this vulnerability, not just during crisis, in normal times. In normal times, it's really important. If we are running after the shock, we're always behind. So we have to do this in normal time. And we have to use, therefore, a comprehensive indicator to track short-term impact as well as sustainability of what we do. When we have a crisis, what do? We rush in, we intervene, we go back. Did we bring people back to normalcy? Have we resolved the problem satisfactorily? Is it sustainable? Often we don't have the time to do that. We don't have the resources and the data to do it. So we are thinking here at Academia 2053 about two things. The first thing we call the snow plow principle, which is a very poor example, but I just couldn't find a better one for Sahelian countries and where we don't have snow. But if you go in the northern municipalities where they have snow, every municipality knows when we have a storm, where we're going to have a problem. They know it already. And when they know storm is coming, they're already there. They're waiting for the snow to come. They're ready to intervene. And between snow seasons, they do the kind of work and maintenance and adjustment that they need so the next storm is less disruptive. Okay? If we take that principle and take it to community vulnerability, what we're trying to do here is to locate those priority vulnerable areas even before the shock comes. We know where they're located. When we know a shock is coming, immediately we get ready. We have the truck, like the snow trucks, but we have our instruments in place so we can act. We need to identify during normal times priority investment to reduce the vulnerability, just like they do road improvements and other things to improve road conditions when snow comes. They do that in normal times. Let's do that also here in normal time. And when we intervene, let's plan and target our crisis response measures. So let me go here quickly and see how that will transfer now to community vulnerability. We have developed for every country what we call a composite vulnerability index to rank all the communities, the most vulnerable to the least vulnerable and to the little bit more, a little bit less vulnerable. So you know where your country's communities are that are most likely to be affected if you have an issue and a crisis. And that you know. And you see the composite. Is it poverty? Is it nutritional status? Is it access to health services? Is it access to infrastructure? Is it prevalence of chronic disease? You know all these different things. And during normal time, you work on that. If it's chronic diseases, how do I deal with that in the most vulnerable communities during normal times to increase the shock absorption capacity? That's how we make sure that the next shock is not going to be very disruptive and it's not going to lead to large-scale suffering, right? So we need to do this and understand that. Then the next principle here is the fever thermometer principle. It's just, again, here to have an illustration of what the thinking is. Not because everybody in my family is in health. My wife, my sister-in-law, my daughters are all in the health areas. But when you go to an emergency room and a patient comes in, whether they fell from a tree or indigestions, heart attack, whatever it is, the first thing they do is to take the vital signs. Blood pressure, how do you call it, temperature and things like that, right? Because they know those two indicators give you a comprehensive understanding of the status of the body. So can we get to a comprehensive indicator of the livelihood status of a community? And I just zero in on that, like the nurses in the nurses stations do when you deliver patients. They're coming every time and checking, how's the blood pressure, how's the temperature, how's the blood pressure, while you're treating, no matter what the thing is, because it gives you an idea that the patient is recovering. So if you want to do this, we have to have a good indicator, and here we're proposing a community nutrient adequacy indicator, like the blood pressure or the temperature. If you go to a community, if they are poor, it shows in nutrient adequacy. If they have a high prevalence of chronic diseases, it shows. If they have poor access to services, it shows. If they are in a marginal environment, it shows. If they are isolated, it shows. So it's really the closest indicator to blood pressure and fever temperature when it comes to measuring the status of a community. So if we have that, then we have to monitor those changes as we have shocks and in normal times, evaluate policies in terms of the impact on nutrient intake, not just in times of crisis. You want to do an export ban, you want to impose tariffs, you want to add subsidies, you want to do income transfer, you can do that based on the impact it's going to have on nutrient adequacy. Access to, when we have shocks, we can assess the effects and we can identify priority investment to boost nutrient intakes in normal time. Here's an example from Senegal. We looked at about more than a dozen micronutrients mapped across the country, and we have this for 14 countries right now. The only obstacle is having really good representative consumption service in those countries, but we have it for 14 countries, production as well as consumption of all these different micronutrients. And you use this, you know, which micronutrients is the most inadequate in intake, but also when you do a policy, you can now link this to a model that will tell you, so it's not coming, okay, So you can have, here you have a place called Koupentoum in Senegal. You see all those red bars are the most critical micronutrients. Okay, so you not just only can have this in zero in at community level, but also what you can do, you can link this to a model that allows you to know how a change in policy or a shock will affect micronutrient intake. So you already can have an idea of the magnitude of the shock before it comes, because you can do the analysis ex ante. But also, if you want to intervene, is it a price subsidy? You have an idea of how much the price should be changing to allow you to bring that community back to the same level of micronutrient intake. If it's an income transfer, you have an idea of how much income do I transfer. If it is food in nature, well, probably you might want to have food here that is rich in iron, then distribute food that is perhaps, let's say, rich in niacin or in protein. So you can already make those choices. And in normal times, you can work on boosting supply and access to those food to improve community vulnerability. Okay? So now let's go to the MA, and that's my last slide here. The biggest innovation under CADEP, and where we can do quite a lot more, and Pandolini talked about the biennial review. Here is what we think could happen in the next 10 years. Currently, the biennial review is backward-looking, tracking past progress, and looking at lost opportunities. What could you have done, and where are you, and so on, right? Which is good, but it's even better if the future biennial review allow us to be forward-looking, to track future possible outcomes, and target opportunities in the future. So using the BR as a planning tool, and not just as a tracking tool, is going to be adding quite a lot of values here. And here is how we're preparing at Academia 2063 to deal with this. We have a tool that is ready to launch next year. And by the way, what I just showed you in the vulnerability and nutrient adequacy is another tool that's also going to be launched early next year. Here we have tools that could allow us to look at what would be the optimal allocation of public agricultural expenditure to achieve the policy and nutrition goals, without even looking at yet what UBR results are. Where would you have to be in order to do that, right? And you see the variation across different regions, and not each and every country have to have the 10%, right? But the regions have wide variance of where things would be. I won't have to discuss all the details there, but we looked at three groups of public expenditure, what we call economic environment, and I'll have to talk about it in the next slide, research expenditure, and total overall expenditure. You see the difference bars. Bottom line, we can now measure what will be the allocation of public expenditure and the overall level of agriculture expenditure for every country that is optimal. So you know that even before you do your BR. Then when you do your BR, we measure what is the gap between the optimal and the actual BR budget shares that we have seen. So you know, am I there or not? And if I'm not, this is where I need to get to. So you can have this information also now, whether it's economic environment or research or public expenditure gaps, right? And I think the next one is this. If you unpack the economic enabling environment category, it is the commitment to the CADEP agenda, trade investment, facilitating investment, or mutual accountability. Those are the three enabling environment indicators. There too, you can measure the gaps of the country. It allows you to allocate within the agricultural portfolio how best will I adjust my expenditures so that I can hit my poverty and nutrition targets. That is going to be the kind of information going forward that allows the PR to become more of a forward-looking and planning, because from here now you look at your different policies, and it's going to be unpacked also on that platform for individual countries to be able to do their simulations about individual policies and how that can help them improve their outcomes going forward. So thank you very much for your time. Oh, sorry, I need to do this one. Okay, so here you see that we show how additional goal achievement could be realized just by allocating optimally the budget. That's good guidance. The last one, Madam Chair, just on the risk of policy reversal. CADEP has been a policy renewal agenda all along to try to improve on the margin what we do. But now, going for the next 10 years, we have to be careful in order not to undo what CADEP has done to bring us to where we are. And I call this policy reversal, meaning a return to policies that have failed in the past. And we have to resist that. And we have seen that happening in so many countries slowly. And why is that possible? That we can go back to those old policies that have failed. We have very limited institutional memory. We just don't capture what we did 20 years ago that worked and what didn't work. It's just nowhere to be found. If you're not lucky enough that you've been around there, you wouldn't know. You just cannot, okay? We have a new generation of leaders who are therefore acting in that void. They have a greater fiscal space. Any country can run any program they want, not many of them at once, but any program they want that can be disruptive because they have the money to do it. It's not like you need anybody's help to do that right now. All right? We have open, pluralistic political systems. We have populist pressures and pressure to respond to shocks. Okay? And that can create us to go back to policies which people in the past did not enact because they thought they were bad. They were intuitively good. And unless you can discern, you rush to those, because you have to act and act quickly. And we have those signs right now. The growing embrace of input subsidy schemes, we're not trying to target. We just go and say input subsidies are good and we do it. We've been there. This country has done it in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? Growing as a child, our farmers needed nothing to buy. From pesticides to herbicides to grains, even the packing bag was coming from the government. So it's not yes or no, but how you do it, but we're just rushing to it. The frequency of export prohibition, just last week, from Niger and other countries, and even Benin and others. Price controls for rising numbers of products. In this country, we're talking about controlling prices just before the elections, setting up almost a brigade, and I grew up with that in the 70s. It didn't help, right? So we're planning for agencies to monitor traders, the rising debt burden, the recent decline in public expenditures in agriculture. They're just mistakes that are out there, and we have to pay attention to that. Here's an example. I will not spend a lot of time on it. What used to happen in Africa, and I remember in Nigeria, I talked about in Kenya, a time when it was illegal to carry a bag of maize across the district line. And a young lady comes, no, that doesn't exist. I said, yes, ma'am, it did exist, and it did exist in Kenya. In Malawi, only ADMARC could trade. In Mali, it was illegal for a private operator to be involved in cereals. So it's not like those things didn't happen before, they didn't help us, but we need to know that, okay? We have to avoid it. We have here worked so hard to bring our debt burden down from the 80s all the way to the early 2000s, which created this fiscal space for us to invest in agriculture, infrastructure, and education. It's going up again. So we have to be very careful about that. Here, inflation, we brought down aggressively, allow people to have a real income. Look, it's going up again. So there are signs out there that we have to be very careful about and do that. And this was the result, and this is where I'm going to be stopping now, Madam Moderator. This graph we did several years ago, just showing how those bad policies in the past have stunted the agricultural sector. Everywhere the blue rectangle is what should have been the size of the agricultural sector in the economy based on where it was in terms of development. The red circle is where it was actually. So for most countries, all those bad policies have stunted agriculture. That's why you go across the continent, you find few countries where agriculture is more than 20% share of the GDP because we lost a lot of steam. So those same policies will produce the same results. So we have to be very careful about that. And thank you, Madam Chair, and sorry for being a little bit too long. Merci.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Badiane. I think we have heard it all from the researcher himself, not only as to where did we fall short, but really, really providing us the deep details as to why that has happened. With this, we are not doing so well with our time. I will therefore immediately call up and of course opportunities and how they have been implementing that under the opportunities and how they have been implementing that under the under ROPA. Online Daniel Mutamba, who is my colleague from the African Union Implementing Agency, what we call AUDA NEPAD. He will be dialing in from Johannesburg, South Africa. Please check if Mr. Mutamba is online. He's not online? Okay, we will take note of that. Could you kindly check whether Dr. Majora is online? Thank you very much, Dr. Mabuza. Dr. Mabuza is from Cardesa, and will talk to us about regional partnerships in the implementation of CADAP, and they do have a particular role that they play within the region, SADC, but also across the continent in supporting the next agricultural agenda. And lastly, I hope she is online, my sister, Dr. Maria Mwanzala from AFAP, to talk to us on the involvement of the private sector. I think we all know the role that AFAP do, with a key specific focus on the private sector. Thank you so very, very much, and it is great to have you all here with us. Now that perhaps let me first start with one of our panelists online, Mr. Majola, to give us some regional perspective, really, with key focus as to what are those roles that you are seeing the region playing to achieve the CADAP goals. And the presenters have already mentioned really some of those goals, because it's all talking to ending hunger on our continent. But of most importance, we also heard from Dr. Badiane about mitigating and adapting to those situations. If that truck can be warned and really be aware of the snow coming, we should also be ready when the shocks are happening within this continent. So what are those lessons that you can talk to us, particularly within the Southern Africa, as you are part of CADESA sitting in the SADC region? Dr. Majola, please.
Okay. Thank you, moderator. I just want to confirm if you can hear me clearly.
We can surely hear you very well.
Okay, thank you. No, I just want to thank Dr. Usman for a brilliant presentation that he has given, and to reflect on the presentation, also connecting to what we are doing as CADESA. One can maybe begin by saying that CADESA, under this initiative, is working very closely with the SADC Secretariat. And what we've been doing so far was mainly on capacity development of the member states, for them to understand the concept of the CADAP process, and also what is required in terms of the data and how they are expected to achieve the indicators. And also to sort of bring to their attention how they can domesticate some of the CADAP processes, because one thing that we need to be careful of, which has been prevalent in the region, is we tend to take some of these programs as a standalone initiative. Yet it is very important that, since this initiative is one that is agreed to by our leaders, the member states, of course coming from the different ministries or the different sectors, it is it is our responsibility at the regional level to work with the member states so that the indicators or all the activities within this process, they are embedded within country programs. So if they are embedded within country programs, then we know for sure that whatever source of funding we receive, be it external, be it from internal sources, it is financing the implementation of those activities. And then in a way, we will know that we are achieving our indicators. So when we're now tracking, we're not tracking independent initiative, but we're tracking from within. All that we'll be doing now is just to report. We just respond to the CADA process and we report. In that way, there will be sustainability in all these programs rather than to take them as independent. And then again, when we report to the meeting of ministers that we normally have on an annual basis, we have been reporting that, we have always had a section in that report where we inform ministers on how far our countries are faring. So that one, I think we've done well by reporting, but not in terms of the levels that we have reached, because as we know, none of our countries have reached the targets that we set. So it's a matter now of improving, as I've made an example with what I indicated initially. So that kind of platform where we report, it has to be there. But we should not only report to the superiors, but also make sure that this point that was touched, I think, at the end of the presentation of the policy reversal, it shows that we have a job to do with our politicians, because that's where we sometimes get it wrong. It's very, very important that we need to to make them understand of what some of these policy statements can trigger, which can also undo what countries may already have invested. And then again, what has been suggested in terms of the forward-looking biennial review, I think that's a very good initiative. It should be combined also with the review of saying we're looking backwards. What have we achieved? It's always good to know what your target is. And I think if I heard correctly, these are at national level. So if it is at national level, that is where the action happens. So the role now at the regional level would be to enforce and facilitate collaboration among member states, and also continue to develop the capacity, bring all the experts to assist our member states so that they do what is expected and they move towards meeting their targets, which if we're doing this forward-looking review, countries would know exactly what they are aiming towards. So in a way, those would be their other indicators within the various programs. But otherwise, I think all the collaborations that CADESA has established under this process, for instance, with ANAPRI, with the AU, AUDA NEPAD, and the SADC Secretariat itself. Now we're also working with, we're finalizing our MOU also with Academia 2063, which we do believe that as we move to the post-Malabo era, we will be able to work closely and push the agenda as it will be presented to us early next year, where our member states will endorse. Another point that I want to mention, the issue of drivers. What I feel is an innovation here is these are not just national drivers. They are drivers that are being looked at through a community lens, because that is where we know that our people are. So if we drill down to communities, it sort of disaggregates whatever indicators that we're looking at, rather than lumping them at national level, but breaking them to the community level. I'm sure in future we'll go down to see at what level beyond the community level we can go down to. One thing that I would want to also bring up is there are also drivers that are being promoted by FAO, looking at the food systems resilience. I don't know to what extent these ones reflect what FAO has already done, just so to avoid doing things in silos without reflecting on what is already there. I may not know who came first, but under Food Systems Resilience Program, we have been introduced to these ones by FAO. So I think for us at regional level, before we drill down to countries, when we look at some of these drivers, we would need to make sure that in as much as we want these drivers to be at country level, they are not confusing to the countries. We need something that is concrete. We take the best and we also include those that are country specific when we're talking of drivers towards a variability index as well as the food systems resilience. I think I can stop there, moderator, for now. And if there's any question or point that you may want me to expand on, I can come back. I thank you.
Yes, thank you so very much. And yes, we would like you to please still keep on. I think in the next 30 minutes, we should be done with our session. And we do have a short slot of 2 or 3 questions before we close off. So it will be good for you to hang on. And most importantly, we might want you to touch base a little bit really on what is that you see the region, probably even the SADC Secretariat, will be doing to contribute to the post 2025 agenda. I would want to move on immediately to Ms. Shidikwa, because you have talked about the regional, and we have somebody, of course, at the national government level. I am fully aware that Namibia, I think, even just a week or two, you just finalized, and I hope that I think your cabinet have just endorsed your new agricultural framework, yeah, for the next 20 years. It would be good as to give some highlights as to how Namibia as a country really has reflected, the priorities of the next agenda. But of course, also of importance, you may also talk to how the country has done in terms of implementing CAADP, perhaps even specific challenges that you have seen, hoping that those challenges are now being addressed in the new strategy that you have just completed. Ms. Shidika, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Elago. Maybe before I start with that, I need to thank ANAPRI for inviting me here today to this conference. It's actually my very first time attending such a conference, and I would also want to thank all the partners that have made it so possible for us to be here. So I'm happy and I'm glad to be here. Okay, coming back to the question, Namibia just recently launched its National Agriculture Investment Plan, and is domestically known as Strategy for the Transformation of the Agri-Food Sector. So I believe this strategy is very inclusive because it has taken an approach of sustainable development. We have 4 pillars, of which one is to increase production, productivity, and agribusiness. The second one has to talk about food security and nutrition, as well as human capacity. Yesterday we have spoken about human resources within Policy Research Institute. So it's kind of already taken care of us in our pillar 2, but yeah. And then the third one talks about sustainable resource management. We even talk about the soil management issues. We are talking about, yesterday we spoke of degradation of African soil. So because what we have learned, for instance, in Namibia, we are using old regulatory framework. Like the Soil Conservation Act is of 1969. You can imagine, over 50 years. So we are advocating for regulatory framework in pillar number 4. So hence, perhaps this outdated regulatory framework will be reviewed as we go forward with the implementation of this new strategy. If I may come to the other point where you ask about how we have been implementing CAADP processes in Namibia, Namibia all along has prioritized agriculture into its national development plan from NDP 2, 3, 4, even the one that just ended. And we have a national agriculture policy that was developed in 2015. Hence, we were able to report on a biannual basis because we have, despite that we just launched the start like on 6 November 2024, it's not like we haven't been doing anything. We have been reporting, we have been implementing with those existing policy measures. What are some of the challenges now? We have observed country. For like in 2012, 13, 15, 16, 18, 19, we declared drought. So that has a negative impact on our production. So these are some of the challenges, climate change. And in this conference, we spoke about it yesterday. I hope going forward we'll be assisted as a country. Also, another challenge is on private sector engagement. Principles is to talk about joint efforts, public-private, but it appears that we have observed little engagement from the private sector. We know government is there to create an enabling environment, but private sector is supposed to inject in our economies, but we have little kind of efforts from them. And also another challenge, it has to do with data collection. Data is not captured at a central point. I would want to talk about, for instance, public spending, the 10% as per the CAADP requirements. Mostly what has been reported is basically what the Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Rent Reform is allocated. But in Namibia, we have institutions. For instance, the Department of Correctional Service. They have farms, they produce, and even sometimes when they have surpluses, they supply within the domestic economy. But this public expenditure lies within that department. So the point I'm trying to make here is to say we don't have data captured at a central point, though we have agricultural activities happening here and there. It's not recorded, like it's not consolidated. As such, you would find what is recorded is mostly from the ministry that is responsible for agriculture. That is Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform. I think I've tried. Thank you.
I think as a first timer, like you mentioned, to be in such a conference as a panelist, you surely did very well. Yeah. And thank you for those pinning out specifically the challenges that you are observing. And most of those, Dr. Badiani actually in his presentation talked to very, very well. Allow me to, I think we need to put on our headsets eventually. I would want us to move on to Mr. Cisse, who is representing Mr. Sal of ROPA. ROPA presents a very, very important constituency as far as agricultural transformation is concerned. I think we all know that over 60% of our population depend on agriculture. And out of these, we're talking about smallholder farmers. Dr. Badian, in his analysis, kept on reminding us to say we are not talking about the big dogs. We're talking about that 1, 2, 3 small groups trying to do the end means, trying to support and do what is necessary for agricultural transformation. So having said that, we would want you to give us some aspects which could touch to Senegal as a country, but of course, for instance, ROPA does represent West Africa, as to how does these small farmers in West Africa actually look at CAADP? Does it benefit them at all? Let alone, are they even aware of that we do have CAADP, which is the only Africa's agricultural framework under the African Union, to see how we can drive this agenda. So let's hear from your perspective in this regard. But of course, also you may touch bases to how you see us moving forward, especially that now we are at the very, very last bit to endorse the next agri-system agenda at the African Union level.
Merci beaucoup, madame, et bonjour à tous. Donc, effectivement, je suis ici au nom du ROPA, donc le réseau des organisations paysannes et producteurs agricoles de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Excusez-moi. Au Sénégal, il y a une plateforme du ROPA, notamment le Conseil national de concertation et de coopération des ruraux. On peut même dire qu'il est fondateur du ROPA, parce que l'initiative de réfléchir sur une plateforme régionale est partie d'ici, avec, sûrement certaines personnes le connaissent, le doyen Mamadou Sissoko. Donc nous avons pensé qu'il faudrait que les producteurs agricoles de l'Afrique de l'Ouest et même de l'Afrique puissent se parler et avoir une position commune. C'est cela qui a donné naissance au ROPA en 2000. Et au-delà du ROPA, dans les 5 régions d'Afrique, il y a une plateforme sœur du ROPA. Et ces plateformes se sont retrouvées pour créer la PAFO, the Pan-African Farmer Organization, qui est un partenaire proche de l'Union africaine. Donc pour dire que le PDDA, effectivement, c'est un programme continental qui a associé les organisations de producteurs. En fait, dans nos principes de base, on estime que l'agriculture, c'est d'abord l'affaire des agriculteurs. C'est pourquoi, dans tous les processus qui concernent l'agriculture au niveau pays, au niveau des sous-régions, au niveau continental, nos organisations se mobilisent pour donner la position des agriculteurs. Pour le PDDA, il faut dire que ça a été un programme innovant et très important pour le continent, mais également pour les régions jusque dans les pays. Parce que je pense que les présentations ont montré que cela a permis d'avoir une politique agricole africaine, de donner des orientations dans les régions où chaque région a travaillé à développer un programme régional d'investissement agricole et cela s'est décliné dans les pays à travers les programmes nationaux d'investissement agricole. La deuxième phase nous a amené à ajouter l'investissement agricole pour la sécurité alimentaire et la nutrition. Donc, autant au niveau national, régional que continental, les organisations se sont mobilisées pour participer. Effectivement, il y a eu des avancées. D'abord, cette reconnaissance de l'importance de l'agriculture familiale. Je pense qu'on l'a dit, une agriculture familiale qui nourrit en grande partie le continent. Malheureusement, le message qu'on perçoit la plupart du temps, c'est les quantités d'aliments importés. Mais on ne parle pas des quantités d'aliments produits en Afrique par les producteurs. Ce qu'on ne perçoit pas également, c'est vraiment le nombre d'emplois qui est en tout cas mobilisé à travers l'agriculture familiale. Effectivement, on parle du chômage. Il faut dire que quand même le PDDA a permis de mettre en exergue tous ces avancées. Notamment également le rôle central que les organisations, que les agriculteurs jouent dans le développement des chaînes de valeur et dans la promotion des économies locales. quasiment tout ce qui bouge en termes d'économie dans nos terroirs, c'est l'œuvre des agriculteurs, c'est l'œuvre des exploitations familiales. Pour l'essentiel, même les industries qui prospèrent en milieu rural sont alimentées par ces exploitations familiales. Donc pour dire que c'est un rôle central que le PDDA a permis de mettre en exergue, mais néanmoins quand même, il faut dire qu'il y a encore des défis majeurs sur lesquels cette deuxième génération de PDDA, je ne sais pas comment on va l'appeler, devrait pouvoir prendre en charge. Effectivement, il y a cette reconnaissance, mais elle est encore insuffisante. Malheureusement, quand on parle d'agriculture, la plupart du temps, on fait focus sur l'activité et très peu sur l'acteur. Je pense qu'il faudrait qu'on réoriente notre approche vers le développement humain, parce que tout est centré sur l'acteur, la personne. La finalité de notre intervention, c'est le bien-être des personnes. Et tout ce qu'on fait doit concourir vers ce bien-être. Le défi majeur qu'on a dans notre continent, les agriculteurs ne sont pas suffisamment reconnus. Et ça, c'est une injustice. Et quand je parle de reconnaissance, je parle de reconnaissance en tant que profession. Aujourd'hui, on identifie facilement dans nos pays qui est éducateur, qui est enseignant, qui est dans le métier de la santé, mais n'importe qui peut être agriculteur, et même l'enseignant qui est dans un village, il est enseignant, il est agriculteur, et quand il y a des politiques d'accompagnement des agriculteurs, l'enseignant peut accéder au même titre que l'agriculteur aux subventions de l'État, aux avantages, aux accompagnements que l'État fait. Je pense qu'il y a un statut qu'il faut donner à l'agriculteur. Il est important que dans nos pays, on travaille à cette reconnaissance qui permet de donner un statut aux agriculteurs et qui permet également de leur offrir l'accompagnement nécessaire comme ça se fait dans les autres métiers. Quand je parle d'accompagnement, je parle surtout de protection sociale. On met la personne humaine au cœur de notre intervention avant de penser aux autres actions qui viendront l'accompagner. Je parle même de protection sociale, et cette protection sociale, au-delà de la santé, c'est la protection également de l'accès qui lui permet, des accès qui lui permettent de faire correctement son travail. Je commencerai par dire la question de l'accès au foncier. Dans beaucoup de notre pays, les paysans n'ont pas de droit reconnu qui leur permet d'être à l'aise et de pouvoir même travailler dans... En tout cas, on parle beaucoup d'agroécologie, on parle beaucoup de résilience, mais si il n'est pas évident qu'on a les financements sont encore développés, on a des taux de 2%, etc. Alors que ailleurs, en tout cas dans nos pays, on est à 10%, 15%, et même malheureusement le système financier décentralisé fait des taux de 18%, 20%. Et dans ces conditions, comment on peut arriver à des activités quand même qui sont rentables pour garantir le bien-être? Donc voilà un peu peut-être une première intervention. Je pourrais revenir si vous voulez. Merci.
Thank you so very much for those valuable insights. Yes, I wish that we have more time to elaborate on them, but I can almost be sure that we are not doing good with time, so we might not be able to really do more elaboration on second rounds. But allow me to move on to Maria, who is joining us online. Maria is from AFAP, as I have earlier on alluded to. AFAP is really there to drive the agenda as to how the private sector can be involved in policies with a specific focus on fertilizer as one of the agricultural input. I think earlier on, Madam Shidikwa from Namibia mentioned that one of the challenges that they have is the involvement of the private sector. Yeah, they see almost non-existence of the private sector engagement between them as a public sector, as a government, and the private sector sitting on the other side. So I would like Maria to elaborate really with us as to what is the role that AFAP is playing, but of importance, I would like you to touch on that involvement aspect. How are you engaging with the governments? How are you engaging even with other regional organizations to make sure that the commitment and contribution of the private sector is well taken care of within the policies and plans of the governments? Over to you, Maria.
Thank you, moderator. I'm going to be referring to my notes. Can you still see me?
Yes, and we can hear you very well.
Okay. Okay, good. So I actually organized my presentation in two parts. One is to talk about the role the private sector has played to help Africa achieve its CAADP targets. And then secondly, how can the private sector collaborate with governments, the RECs and development partners to drive the agricultural transformation agenda of Africa. So in terms of what role the private sector has played to help Africa achieve its targets, I would say it has actually done quite a lot to help us meet our goals of reducing poverty, ending hunger, and eliminating malnutrition. And it has done this by playing the very strong and important role of acting as a conduit between farmers and consumers. Specifically, 96% of the output produced on farms in Africa is supplied to domestic markets by the domestic private sector, meaning only about 4% of what is produced for export markets. And furthermore, 80% of the food consumed in Africa is marketed and handled by the private sector. So this means the private sector is actually very crucial in terms of making a dent in hunger in Africa, because it handles 96% of the output that our farmers produce, and it's responsible for making available 80% of the food that is consumed to our population. And so who is this private sector? Well, as was indicated by our keynote speaker, it is mainly small and medium enterprises in the middle of both the input and output value chains. So we're talking here about wholesalers, processors, logistical operators such as truck drivers, as well as retailers and food services operators. They have invested very heavily in creating distribution networks to link input suppliers and farmers on the one hand, and then they also act as an indispensable conduit between farmers and our urban and rural consumers on the other. Now, if we look more specifically at the agricultural input sector, and more specifically at fertilizers, which is where the space that AFAP works in, I'd like to talk a little bit about how the private sector has invested in order to help Africa meet its CAADP targets. First of all, they've invested very heavily in the fertilizer industry to produce more fertilizers and also more suitable fertilizers, such as customized fertilizer blends that are often based on soil tests that in many cases these private companies themselves have invested their own money to carry out. So for example, as a result, we see that between 2006 and today, the number of blenders has more than doubled in sub-Saharan Africa. And in Nigeria, the private sector has invested over $4 billion in new ammonia capacity. Furthermore, at the moment, sub-Saharan Africa has about 59 existing blending plants. There's lime production in some countries, such as Rwanda and Kenya, and there are also at least 15 plants producing organic fertilizers in the sub-region. Secondly, the private sector has invested heavily in improving farmer knowledge about fertilizers and how to use them correctly by setting up demonstration plots and also hosting farmer field days, often in collaboration with the Ministries of Agriculture and Development organizations. And they also provide these inputs for free to the ministries and to development partners so they can set up their own demonstration plots for farmers. The private sector has also invested heavily in building distribution networks and infrastructure, particularly storage and transportation facilities, which means they can help make inputs available to farmers at the right place and at the right time. For example, between 2005 and 2016, the number of trained agri-dealers increased from only 10 to more than 1,000 in Rwanda, from 1,200 to more than 7,000 in Kenya, and from 2,300 to more than 4,000 in Ghana. And as a result, the distance that smallholder farmers have to travel to reach an agri-dealer in those countries has declined significantly. And then another area where the private sector has invested is also to provide credit to other actors in the input supply chain, which allows a larger amount of fertilizer to flow to the farm gate. So now I'd like to turn to the second question of how can the private sector collaborate with governments, regional economic communities, and development partners to drive our inclusive agriculture transformation agenda. And to answer this question, I will draw heavily from examples, again, from the fertilizer subsector, since that is my area of expertise. So this private sector can collaborate with governments and other stakeholders in the following ways. First, it can collaborate to establish viable institutions, specifically fertilizer trade dealer associations, which they can then use as platforms to interface with government effectively through public-private dialogues. And the private sector should also invest in the sustainability of these institutions by ensuring that they collect membership and subscription fees. And in this way, they will have a recognized platform that they can use to provide organized, evidence-based input to the policy development processes, and in particular help governments and regional economic communities develop policies that will support increased private sector investment and engagement in our food systems. The private sector can also assist government with policy implementation, and I can give two examples. One is the well-known example of fertilizer subsidies, whereby the private sector can help the government or allow the government to use its distribution networks to distribute subsidized fertilizer to farmers. Another example is self-regulation for quality control. In this case, the suppliers, by that I mean manufacturers and blenders, can work with the government to put traceability mechanisms on their bags to help to preserve fertilizer quality at all stages of the value chain. The private sector can also collaborate with government and development partners to support increased availability of finance in the fertilizer value chain by being willing to take on some of the risk. Specifically, it can agree to participate in risk-sharing agreements with governments and development partners, such as credit guarantee programs that are designed to improve access to finance in the fertilizer value chain. Another area where the private sector can invest is of course, to increase fertilizer supply capacity, meaning new fertilizer production and blending facilities using locally available resources. And it can also focus on producing fertilizers that are a blend of organic and inorganic materials, thereby supporting the government's agenda of promoting soil health while improving productivity through the increased use of fertilizers. So having said all this, the various areas where the private sector can invest is by establishing stronger associations that it can use to interact with government more effectively, invest to support policy implementation, particularly when it comes to subsidies and self-regulation for quality control, invest to increase availability of finance by participating in risk-sharing mechanisms, etc. The private sector can and is willing to do this, but I cannot emphasize enough that in order for these investments to take place, we need to have policy consistency and clarity, because the private sector needs a stable, predictable environment. Otherwise, the risk of losing their investments is simply too high, and they will be discouraged from making these necessary investments that are really required for the growth and transformation of our food systems in Africa. And with that, I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. To make good use of the time, I will not summarize what you said, because we will have a short summary in the end. I think the bottom line there is the sector is ready to support so long countries ensure a conducive environment for them to invest. The transformation and growth strategy. Now with that versus the linkage to implement CADAP, what are some of the highlights that you could talk to us that your think tank group has been embarking on, versus really the picture that Dr. Badiane have indicated to us as to how the continent look, but also you may also touch base on some of the aspects that he has taken on board as to moving forward for the next 10 years. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. moderator, for that question. Yes, it's interesting to reflect on what Dr. Badian shared. It was a lot of things, very interesting presentation indeed. Thank you very much for that. But looking at where we are coming from in terms of CADIP and where we would like to go, maybe I'll just highlight a few things that I picked from his presentation. First, I think it's the commitment to the CADIP process for most of the countries. We've seen many of the countries reporting up to the 4th cycle. I don't remember the numbers you gave, but we see good progress. Most of the African countries are reporting. That means there is that commitment, both political commitment and also commitment from the agriculture sector that drives the agenda. In terms of what I saw when it comes to indicators, yes, different countries have made different or varying progress in terms of the indicators. And we see that ability to report and to track is useful information for the countries themselves. We'll be able to say what is working for us, what's not working, where are we making progress, where are we not making progress, and I think most importantly, what can we do going forward post-2025? I think what you shared really is a good point of reflection for the countries in terms of where we are going, we are making progress. But thinking about the future, I really liked what you brought out, but I think what caught my attention is the snowplow principle. Very thoughtful when we are thinking about community resilience and what that means going forward, because we are talking about not just small-scale producers who are sometimes very difficult to support given the nature of the environment they work in, the way they're structured, but also the focus on the other people in the business space within the agriculture sector. I think you mentioned the small, micro, medium enterprises that are going to be key in fulfilling our aspirations post-2025. So what role will they play? How will they be supported to be able to meet the objectives, the aspirations of CADIP? And I think when we think about, if I go back to that snowplow principle, it brought real memories about, if I speak about the Kenyan situation. We struggle a lot with the pastoralist community. When a drought comes, they are hit very hard. When it rains, the rain, in fact, destroys what was left in terms of their livelihood. So if we are to use that principle to think about in good times, how do we find out those spots that need support, those areas that require investment even before an event like a drought, flooding. I think we've struggled even thinking through livestock offtake programs that are on and off. But I think if we are focused on what you shared in terms of that snowplow principle, I think as countries, I singled out Kenya because I know best, as countries we can learn how to anticipate some of these challenges and how to deal with them. The other thing I think in terms of reflecting on your presentation is that it's important to think about the biennial review, not just as a tracking tool, but I think both as a tracking tool and a planning tool. As a tracking tool, yes, it has helped us a lot, moving from the first review up to the fourth cycle. Countries have seen what they are not doing well and how they can do better. I think that's helpful. But I like your reflections on how we can use that as a planning tool going forward. So I think a combination of that would really be helpful as we go to the post-25 agenda. Your reflections on the policy reversals, I think that hit home for most of us. And we'll be thinking, even as think tanks, members of ANAPRI, how do we engage our governments in terms of what do those policy reversals mean? What is the impact on agriculture? What's the impact on economic growth in general? How does it impact the most vulnerable in the society? And what can we do in terms of advising the government? I think we have a lot to do. I was thinking in terms of ANAPRI, where can we, what type of analysis could we do to provide direction, even as we are thinking about post-2025? So maybe just to complete that, I'd say as an institution, Tegemeo has been involved in this CADI process as one of the members of the country team. I think the way Kenya has organized the data collection and the reporting process has been. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Kirimi. Really ending off our panel discussion with those, I could even say, takeaway messages, how you linked what has been happening really versus the picture that Dr. Badiane has presented. I will not go into details of that summary because Dr. Toto will give that. Bear with us. Yes, we have run out of time. Just give us 5 minutes to end this. I think it is only fair enough if there is any one, maximum two pinning question that you would want to draw your attention to our panelists, be it the ones physically or on the line. I already have my two hands. Thank you very much. I will definitely take only that hand and that hand. We are over an hour behind the schedule. Okay, the third one will be the one online.
Data is effective, cheapest way of undertaking irrigation to promote our food systems. I would want more information on this. Thank you.
It will be for Dr. Badiane later. Next one. We strictly have 4, 3 here and 1 online, and we respond shortly.
Thank you very much, David from Kenya. First, I really liked Dr. Badiane's presentation, particularly around the shifts to market-led systems, particularly in terms of value addition and progressively moving into systems that we have products really attracted to urban areas through systems that build on value addition, value-added products, and the role of SMEs. However, though Bodasa mentioned a bit of that, there are certain factors among the list that he had which touch on some of the constraining fiscal and monetary policies around taxation, around high interest rates, and particularly the issue of over-regulation that sometimes are imposed up on the small and micro enterprises that are emerging that really constrain their performance. And we think these have been floated in some quarters as very critical issues that actually constrain the performance of emerging SMEs. And he didn't mention, I don't know what his take is, and Bodasa could also maybe speak to that. in terms of how governments can go around it to create this enabling environment that can facilitate these emerging entities in ensuring that we progressively move toward these market-led systems. Thank you.
That was another one for Dr. Badiani in terms of the shift on market-led. Last one there before we then read the one question online so that we close off.
Hi, thank you. I also want to thank the doctor for his great presentation. It's one of the few positive presentations that I have ever listened to. It's good to see the developments, the progress that we have made, but then I realized that the problems that we are addressing are also changing fast, right? Populations are growing, the number of people that are facing malnutrition and hunger are increasing, climate catastrophes are happening. And so it sounds like sometimes that the progress that we're making are at best incremental, and sometimes they actually...
Economics in Africa. Make business development chain facilitation in Africa. Make business development chain facilitations to sellers, commercials, and distribution, NPK, and urea. Security guarantee catastrophes, and climate changes with economic actors, local content Africa, and ZLECA for the African Union. I guess this is like very French English question. Does the economic actors in West Africa and civil society of development West Africa Francophone will beneficie institutional helps and assistance in training and capacity building? This is a question from Mr. Babacar Ndiaye, economic actor in West Africa, expert in African civil society of development, West Africa.
Thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, that question has a lot mixed. At first, I thought it's directed to Maria, talking about NPKs and all that, which are components of fertilizer. But then again, the last part of it, I think Dr. Badiana is able to also just capture it. Due to the time, ladies and gentlemen, if you allow me, unless really other panelists would want to come in, let's rather give the opportunity to Dr. Badiana to respond, since already the first three questions were directly linked to his rich presentation.
Thank you very much. I'll start with the last one. How do you make sure that our solutions live past the problems as they come? The development process is a dynamic one. The art of policy making is to be able to respond to challenges and problems as they emerge. So the example here is like just being on a journey with your family, and your kid is asking, are we still there? Are we there? Are we there, right? So you are not going to be there. When you drive on a road, you will see roadblocks you will avoid. You didn't know they were there. You'll make turns, you'll make the tour, and that's how the policy thing is. So the solution today is sustained by knowing how to address the problems of tomorrow. So that's how you sustain the thing that they happen. So, and for that, it's not the knowledge, it is not the money, it is not, but it is the tools, the systems, the institutional framework to do that, to be able to look at the problems and understand them and solve them. That's why things like ANAPRI are extremely important. Local expertise, centers of expertise, experts working directly with the government, and not on an ad hoc way, but having a systematic, coordinated mechanisms of understanding what the issues are, so that the ministries don't run and look around when they have a problem and they don't know whom to talk to, or going to the wrong actors. But also the researchers and analysts need to know what the ministries are grappling with, so that they can have that in their research, in the bachelor's thesis, the master's thesis, all these different things. That's how we create that ecosystem of knowledge that allows you to respond as these problems emerge and then find solutions as you go. So it really has to be thought about, just like you're saying now, before even those issues come. And you have the capacity to answer. Sorry for being long on that. On the SME issue and public policies, there is a report on that. If you go to our website or just you Google, ATOR, A-T-O-R, 2021. It was in public policies and the emerging processing sector. One thing, though, is that most policies are biased toward the big guys. They don't see the small guys at all. So it's not just even they're doing something wrong, they're just not even aware of the existence. So it's a huge gap there, what we need to do. On irrigation, here again, sorry, I have to refer you to 2 studies we did for Niger and for Burkina Faso, looking at not just the potential for irrigation, in particular small scale, but the cost competitiveness of that, the potential in terms of income generations, how many households could be touched, and things like that. We don't do work on irrigation regularly, but that at least provides good examples of how irrigation can be leveraged competitively in a way that, and efficiently, I meant, in a way that addresses issues at the household level. So thank you for that.
Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call Dr. Toto to summarize the takeaway messages from our discussion.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think it will be a big attempt to try to summarize such a great session. We were all very active in listening to the different speakers and panelists, and I think we had a very great session. I will just go through the key points, not really to summarize, but to give some highlights. The session helped us really to go through the CADE process from Maputo to Malabo, and hopefully next year to Kampala. And we've seen that there have been a lot of progress over the last 2 decades. A lot of progress, as Dr. Badian has mentioned, in terms of productivity, in terms of market access, but the challenges are still there. And one thing I want to highlight here is that those challenges are also coming in a context of policy of polycrisis. We talked about climate change, but we should also be very aware of the challenges coming from security perspective, but also from our governance, especially in region, to some continuity. And it's where most of our governments, both at national but also regional level, we are missing the point. We tend to reinvent the wheel. We are not learning much from the past. But we've seen in the keynote of Dr. Badian some very good promises in terms of where we are going in terms of progress, and also in terms of innovations. The mutual accountability was one of them, and he actually mentioned point from a critical one, and I think is one area where the ANAPRI centers also can help and support government to better collect data on CADE processes, but also help them consolidate those data before communication. The importance of smallholder farmers from ROPA, I think it was one of the key points also from the panel. We tend to talk about agriculture in terms of sector, but we don't talk more about the humans that are behind. The call for having agriculture as a profession, I think, is a good one. Many countries are making progress into that. I know that, for example, Benin has passed into law the profession of agriculture with a professional card for agricultural specialists who can benefit from different initiatives from the government. The issue also of the private sector, and I very much like the fact that the session has made a clear distinction between private sector as those big companies and the private sector as the very small farmers, the very small SMEs that we have thousands of them in our countries supporting our economies, but we are not value them too much. We often refer to them as informal sector that you want to formalize. So I think those are some of the key highlights that I could share with you. The session is another call for us, as the topic of this conference has mentioned, to move from policy to action, to move from strategies to actual implementation. And I think ANAPRI has a good role to play into that. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. As I hand over back to the MC, knowing clearly that we do have researchers, academians in this room, I would want to mention something that from the African Union, the high-level work has already been done in terms of where we want to be for the next 10 years. However, during the year 2025, we as technical teams and researchers and academians will be diving deep from the 6 priority objectives that you have seen today in terms of the indicators that we will be tracking to inform those. So if you have any specific interest to really support the African Union and its member states on how we have to really treat and make sure that all the aspects within these indicators are well captured, that opportunity is still coming, and it will be throughout the year of 2025, since the implementation thereof will only commence in January 2026. I thought it's very important to mention this, so that because we will still would want to see you as academics and researchers to contribute and make an impactful document, action plan for the next 10 years. And please upload my 5 panelists, 3 here and 2 online. Let's go.
Thank you, dear moderator. I'll just ask you 1 minute for the photographer to take an official photo of you and your panelists, please. And Professor Bajan, if he permits us. And also Dr. Freitas. The photographer is coming. And our commissioner. Thank you, Mrs. Pandolemi, for skillfully moderating this session. Our heartfelt gratitude goes to Professor Bajan for his insightful contribution, as well as to all the distinguished speakers here and online. This session has truly deepened our understanding of CAADP and the critical next steps for Africa's food systems beyond 2025. Before we conclude, I'd like to invite Mr. Tinashe Kapuya to the stage for a brief 2-minute announcement. After that, we'll take a short health break. To recharge, please return promptly as we continue with our next session. We'll have a 15 minutes break after Mr. Tinashe Kapuya's 2-minute or 1-minute announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam MC. My quick announcement is as follows. We have session 5 coming up. Everybody is invited for session 5. It's an exciting session. We are convening to get a lot of our centers back in here and resource people who can help us to answer the questions around how centers can and increase their chances of finding funding solutions, right? So we want our centers to get funding for research, and we encourage all of you to come back and participate in this cafe-style conversation. I'm going to appeal to BMGF, AGRA. You are encouraged to come and become part of our resource people teams. We are encouraging people from FAO and all government representatives, please come and attend that session. You will be helpful to inform our conversations there. We want private sector people to come as well. I know my brother Yotam is here. He's going to also be part of that conversation. So please
Okay, these will be the groups that we will get into, because it's going to be a group discussion. Also, a reminder, there's another session in the afternoon. Please also come for that. It's a very exciting session. It's going to be very informative. It's on the policy prioritization through value chain analysis. And then we have the MSc launch later on in the evening. All of you are invited to come as well. Madam Speaker, I'm going to return the mic to you for further conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Kafuya. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, now you can go for a short health break. We're looking forward to seeing you in a few minutes. Let me...
minutes?
30 minutes, yeah.
So we can try to shorten the next session so that people can go for lunch.
Okay.
It's 1 hour 30. It gets so instead of finishing at 12:30, we finish at 1.
Okay, so 12. I'll give them rendezvous in 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Okay.
This will be a 10 minutes break. So you should be. We are expecting everyone to be back at 11:55.
They're not coming back at 11.
Welcome to the 11th Annual ANAPRI Stakeholders Conference, brought to you right from the land of Teranga, Dakar, Senegal, with the theme From Policy to Practice, Strengthening Local Institutions for Sustainable Food Systems Transformation in Africa. This conference is hosted by ISRABAM in Dakar, Senegal, and sponsored by key partners including the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, through the Feed and Future Innovation Lab for Food Security Policy, Research, Capacity and Influence, PRCI, and the Comprehensive the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through the International Fertilizer Development Center, the Michigan State University, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the Center for Coordination of Agricultural Research and Development for Southern Africa, ISDA, the Alliance of a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, the African Union Commission, and all the ANAPRI centers. And now, today's program.
Advancing Africa's agriculture through policy research and influence.